As a Salesforce admin, you know how difficult it can be when you're trying to do user acceptance testing for your Salesforce project and you're struggling to get engagement with your stakeholders. You're struggling to get end users to actually log in and test the system. You're struggling to get senior leaders within the organization to even understand what user acceptance testing is all about and why it's so critical for your Salesforce project. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 game-changing tips to help you level up your user acceptance testing for your Salesforce projects. So let's first talk about what is user acceptance testing. UAT is essentially the phase of a project where we are working on some type of software or system enhancements where we need to have the people who are most impacted by the system, which is typically the end users, but also other stakeholders involved in the initiative that we're focused on, to have them go ahead, log in to a sandbox environment to test out the configuration enhancements that were done to the system in order to ensure that the business requirements that were previously shared as it relates to this particular project were actually addressed through the configuration enhancements that were done in the Salesforce sandbox environment that were done for this particular project. So before we pop the champagne and celebrate that, yes, success, we can go live now, we're done with this project, before we do that, we need to have people actually log in and test the system the same way that a bride tries on her bridal gown, not once, but multiple times before the wedding day. She does not first try it on when guests are coming for the wedding. The same way we typically test drive a car before we decide which car we want to purchase, or if we want to purchase this car. The same way we are testing out the system, which we hope and expect is absolutely perfect. It's magnificent. No changes are needed whatsoever, but we need to confirm before we actually go live with it. We need to confirm that no issues, no glitches can be found. We need to confirm that everything that we wanted and expected to have within the enhancements of this project were absolutely addressed and addressed to our satisfaction, to confirm that everything works the way we want it to, so that when we do go live, we don't have any interruptions within our business workflow. That's what user acceptance testing is all about. So as you can imagine, it is an absolute critical phase for any project. If it's not already clear how incredibly important user acceptance testing is when it comes to Salesforce projects, let's just focus on 3 core elements of why this is so unbelievably important for any type of Salesforce project. For starters, we need to involve the business users in the UAT process. I don't care how busy they are. I don't care how senior or junior they are within the organization. They need to log into the sandbox environment where the configuration enhancements were implemented in order to confirm that they will be able to do their jobs appropriately and hopefully more efficiently once these enhancements actually go live. We need to define clear and measurable acceptance criteria. When they actually log in and test the system, we need to know, were they able to create a new account? Were the end users able to access all of the records, modify all of the records that they need to, see all of the information that they need to see, perform all of the individual steps that they need to perform in order to do their jobs? Are they able to do those things in Salesforce? And we need to get far more granular. Were they able to create a new account? Were they able to create a new account of a specific record type? Were they able to update specific information on that account and actually hit save on that record in order to now view the record? Were they able to perform a search to find that account that they just created? So we need to know exactly what are the different things that these end users need to test, and what are the expected outcomes for each thing that they are testing when they are performing the user acceptance testing. And lastly, we have over here that we need to create realistic test scenarios. In other words, whatever it is that these end users are expected to do in real life when the system goes live, those need to be the specific steps that these people need to be able to perform in the user acceptance testing. And that needs to be aligned with, well, what are the specific enhancements that are being introduced in this specific project? What was the problem that was identified early on in this project? And what were the intended outcomes? What were the business requirements of what the users want to be able to do in the system once the enhancements are implemented? Those are going to be the very specific, realistic scenarios simulating what they're actually doing in the real world. Those are going to be the test scenarios that these user acceptance testers need to perform during UAT. Now that we've covered the overview of what user acceptance testing is all about and how incredibly important it is, let's go ahead and dive into the 5 tips to make sure that your user acceptance testing is successful. Tip number 1, we need to establish very clear testing objectives. By having objectives that are abundantly clear, it allows us to have a clear focus and direction of what the user acceptance testing is going to be targeting on. Maybe it's about introducing a new integration that we have between Salesforce and some other system. Maybe it's the ability to now track certain types of opportunities. And when we have certain types of opportunities, to have other additional information that now becomes required in the system. Maybe it's an entirely new business process that previously was managed on spreadsheets, but now we want to have it managed in Salesforce. So whatever the objective is of your project, that will help define what the focus and direction is for your user acceptance testing. By having well-defined objectives, it helps us ensure that the testing aligns with the goals of the project. Our testing objectives need to be specific, they need to be measurable, they need to be achievable, they need to be relevant, and they need to be time-bound. We need to also make sure that we are engaging with the stakeholders, which typically is not only the end users who are expected to log into the system and work with these records, but also those other individuals downstream who are essentially recipients of the information that is being put into Salesforce. That might mean other Salesforce users that are expected to view these records, people who are looking at reports that contain some of the records or other information or processes that are being managed through this Salesforce enhancement project that you're working on. Or it could be the integration that you have between Salesforce and some other system where Salesforce is pushing information maybe into an ERP system. So our stakeholders for that type of a project might be the users of the ERP system to ensure that they are able to see all of the information that is expected when Salesforce does in fact push the information into the other ERP system. Tip number 2, we need to engage the end users effectively. What does this mean? Well, the end users, the people who are expected to log into Salesforce in order to actually use the new features that we're introducing or the new configuration updates that we are introducing, they play an absolute critical role in the user acceptance testing because they are the only ones who can truly help us make sure that we are representing realistic, real-world scenarios. It's the people who are actually talking to the prospects and customers. They're people who are actually creating and modifying the opportunities or the case records or the campaign records in Salesforce. When interacting with them, we need to communicate the purpose and the benefits of the user acceptance testing so that they understand how doing this dry run, this dress rehearsal, this test drive, whatever terminology or analogies you want to use, by communicating to them how important it is and how beneficial this is in order to make sure that things do go smoothly once we actually turn it on and go live. That will help them prioritize their level of engagement, make sure that they're taking it seriously, and also get them excited for these new features that you've been working on And by getting them excited, it increases user adoption. When you increase user adoption, you have better data quality. When you have better data quality, people are going to be relying more on Salesforce and less on renegade spreadsheets sprinkled out throughout your organization, which means that will help minimize other people within the organization sending you spreadsheets containing renegade data that should have been put into Salesforce in the first place. But instead, we've all been there, and you all know what a disaster that can be, because of course the data in the spreadsheet is not going to match the formatting or the validation rules or anything else that you have in Salesforce. By engaging with the end users early on in the user acceptance testing phase of your project will actually help you gather their insights and get a better understanding of their expectations as it relates to what they perceive this system will be able to do for them. That will also help make sure that everyone is on the same page and will lead to better dialogue between you and the end users. And it will also help manage their expectations to ensure that they are far more realistic and they know what it is that the system can do and what the system cannot do. For example, guess what? Salesforce cannot read people's minds. In addition, by providing clear instructions, user-friendly documentation, and supporting the end users during the user acceptance testing will also eliminate a lot of obstacles and a lot of friction, while also getting people super excited about this project. Will also open the lines of communication and collaboration and brainstorming between the people who are actually using the system and you and everybody else who is responsible for configuring the system for the rest of the team to use to manage their business processes on the Salesforce platform. Tip number 3, creating comprehensive test cases. What do we mean by test cases? Well, test cases are basically the scenarios that the users are expected to do in the system. By having well-designed test cases, you can ensure that the user acceptance testing part of your project is actually thoroughly done and realistic with the typical business scenarios, the business processes that the end users are actually experiencing in the real world. Now, we also need to include both positive and negative test cases in order to validate the expected behaviors and to identify any potential issues. What do we mean by positive and negative test cases? So let's say, for example, that we are working on a project that is for a college admissions office. And we have an application that comes in and it gets reviewed. And we are working through the different steps of the process of what happens when an applicant is accepted. And great, everything is wonderful. We've captured all of the details. We're able to test out the entire scenario of what happens when an applicant is accepted. But what happens if the applicant is rejected? What happens if the applicant actually doesn't give all of the details or documentation or information or whatever money they're supposed to pay? And that simply does not happen. What about those scenarios? Those are the negative test cases, meaning don't always think through the textbook scenario of the perfect use case, because the real world does not work like that. In the real world, we actually have applicants that are being rejected. In the real world, we actually have prospects who are not following up, and they might drop off at various stages along the way. So we need to think about all of those scenarios as well when we are identifying the various test cases that we need to simulate during user acceptance testing. So once we've identified the various test cases, we need to start documenting not only what are those various test cases to sort of create like an inventory of what are those different scenarios that we need to test, but we also need to document what are each of the individual steps that are involved in each of the test cases that we've actually identified. Tip number 4, we need to implement effective test data management. What do we mean by that? In a nutshell, all we mean is the data that is being used for user acceptance testing needs to be realistic, needs to be able to accurately simulate. It does not need to be actual data of your customers, of your prospects, of your deals that you actually have in your production environment. It does not need to be that data at all. You can create fictional data of fictional prospects, fictional customers, fictional deals that look like, they simulate, they have the appropriate fields populated or not populated. They have the same kinds of records associated with them. One of the reasons why it's so incredibly important to have test data that simulates the real world scenario is because this way all of the use cases, all of the scenarios, all of the business processes that you are simulating in Salesforce will have a realistic type of an outcome. The validation rules, the automation, the visibility rules will all simulate what the team will actually experience once everything is in production. So let's use an analogy here. Let's make believe we're talking about a bride trying on her bridal gown before the actual wedding. When the bride is trying it on, she also needs to try to move her arms. Are you able to move your arms? Are you able to stretch your arms out? Simulating that you're hugging someone. Are you also able to sit down? Are you also able to, let's say if you need to bend down to touch your shoe, are you able to do that when you're wearing the dress? Are you able to go up a few steps? Are you able to go down a few steps? Whatever the scenario is that you're going to realistically be doing in the real world, you need to have a realistic test, because otherwise you're wasting your time because the test was not realistic. The test is not going to actually simulate what the team will experience in a real world scenario. So similarly, the data that you are utilizing in your sandbox environment during UAT needs to simulate a realistic use case. Now, depending on the type of project that you are focused on, very often, I'll even go so far to say as more often than not, you can simply have your testers during the UAT testing, you can simply have them create some lead records, contact records, account records. And by the way, my recommendation is make it very clear to them that they should not be putting in names of real customers or prospects, because inevitably they're going to accidentally log into the sandbox environment and log phone calls, emails, open tasks, and forget that they're in a sandbox environment. And then they're going to look in the production environment. Where are those calls that I logged? Whoops, I accidentally logged them in the sandbox environment. That's the browser window that I had open before. And that's going to lead to all kinds of confusion and frustration. So instead, my recommendation is to tell the UAT testers that when they are creating lead records, contact records, account records, opportunity records, they should use fictional historical figures. They should use celebrities. So they can put in Bruce Wayne, Clark Kent, Wonder Woman. They can put in Fred Flintstone, Kim Kardashian, put in whatever contacts, accounts, leads are completely fictional, so that it is abundantly clear to anyone who's looking at anything in the system that this is all fake simulated data. And then they are going to put in the fictional details about the opportunity or about the cases or about the activities, whatever it is that they're expected to do related to this particular project that you're working on. It does not take long for them to test all of that out. And at the same time, they are also confirming that they do have the appropriate permissions to create these records, to edit these records, to view these records in the sandbox environment that you're having them do the UAT testing in. So it does not take long for them to create a handful of records that they can work with throughout the entire UAT testing experience. And this way they have their own records that they are responsible for. If you want them to simulate reassigning records, you have records for them to work with, and they can go ahead and populate whatever specific fields are part of the UAT experience, as well as playing around with any functionality that's part of the UAT experience, as part of the project scope that you're having them work on. But if for whatever reason, the level of complexity of the type of records that you need to test out during UAT for this particular project are far more complex. So let's say, for example, we're talking about testing an integration where it's the ERP system or some other external system that's sending the data into Salesforce, that your specific UAT users don't have permission, and they should not have permission to create these types of records, but they're only editing the records, then yes, you as the Salesforce admin need to bulk import a bunch of fictional records. And by the way, there are many websites that will allow you to create fake data, to generate spreadsheets of fake data using whatever type of data formats you might need. By the way, if you want to use ChatGPT for this, that's another fantastic use case where you can ask ChatGPT to create a table of fictional data, and you can specify what columns you need in that table, as well as how each data point, each column should be formatted. For example, is it a currency field, a date field, a time field, a phone number field, etc. So you can specify all of those things to ChatGPT, and you can leverage ChatGPT to create the fictional records for you. And then you will have to use a tool like Data Loader in order to import the fake data for the UAT testers to use when they are performing the UAT testing. Tip number 5, establish efficient communication channels. If you haven't already noticed, communication is at the core of everything when it comes to user acceptance testing. Explaining what user acceptance testing is all about to the end users who are expected to do the UAT testing, explaining to them what it is that they're expected to do during the UAT testing, helping them work through to actually log into the system and what they're supposed to do and why this is so incredibly important. And for them to give you the feedback of, here are the issues, here are the problems, here are the things that I find confusing or frustrating to do in the system. So in the end, everything about user acceptance testing is really dependent on having clear, transparent, open, collaborative communication between the people working on the project behind the scenes from a technology perspective, as well as the stakeholders, the end users, others who are benefiting from and will be using the system that you're working on. So incredibly important. So let's cover some of the bullet points that we have here. Effective communication is key for a streamlined UAT experience for everyone on the team. Having clear communication channels. What do we even mean by communication channels? What we really mean is, what are the different methods or platforms or ways that you want the UAT testers to be communicating to you? And what are the different ways that you will be communicating to them? And my recommendation is that you should have a variety of different communication channels. Could be email, could be Slack or Teams or Google Chat, whatever platform you happen to be using. I do recommend also having some virtual meetings, in-person meetings if possible. There are many different ways that you can communicate with them, but you need to have some very clearly defined ways for them to communicate back to you. Here are the things that I tested. Here are the bugs that I found. Here are the defects that I found. Here are the different issues that have come up. Here's what works properly, but it's sort of clunky and pretty confusing. How do you expect them to give that to you? Do you expect it to be in an Excel spreadsheet with screenshots? Do you want them to walk over to your desk to show you or explain it to you? Do you want them to pick up the phone to call you? So what are the different methods that you want to establish with your UAT testers for them to communicate back to you where they are, what the issues are, and also how are you communicating back to them the status of resolving the various issues that they have identified so that you can follow up with them in order to explain to them and give them an update indicating, oh, by the way, here are the bugs that you've identified, and here are the ones that so far have been resolved. Here are the ones that we're still working on. Here are the ones that we're going to get to after we've resolved some of the other high priority items that have been identified. You need to establish a cadence of communicating consistently, regularly, with an ongoing cadence. It could be weekly, could be daily, could be hourly, really depends on the type of project, on the demographics, on the geographic location, on the prioritization of this particular project. But you need to be communicating with your user acceptance testing team, the end users, the stakeholders. You need to be communicating with them on a regular basis in terms of, here's where we are, Here's how much time is left, how many days are left for you to complete the UAT testing. Here's where we are in terms of the bugs or defects or additional enhancements that have been identified. Here's how much time we expect it to take to resolve some of the open items that we're still working on, so that this way they know that the effort that they are putting in is actually being appreciated and utilized and being acted upon, so that they don't feel like they are wasting their time. Because if they feel like they are wasting their time with the UAT, I can guarantee that they will not be putting in a whole lot more time moving forward for your initiative, either the initiative that you're working on now or future projects that you might be working on. If you want to learn more about managing your user acceptance testing like a pro, I would recommend this brand new course that I recently rolled out called UAT Mastery. I've taken my many years of experience managing not only Salesforce projects, but other high-stakes, high-level IT projects, and condensed all of the knowledge and information and best practices and tips and templates and checklists that I have regarding managing the UAT phase of any Salesforce project. And I've condensed it down to this online on-demand course so that you can learn from soup to nuts everything that you need to know to manage the UAT phase of your Salesforce projects without experiencing a lot of the bumps and bruises that many people experience when they have not been properly trained. In this course, you're going to learn how to communicate the importance of user acceptance testing to your stakeholders and your end users, get them engaged in the project. You're going to learn how to define the scope and the objectives of the user acceptance testing. You're going to learn how to plan and prepare for user acceptance testing with confidence, how to develop and execute test cases like a pro. You're going to learn how to manage the defects, all of the issues and glitches and surprises that come up during UAT testing. You're going to learn how to avoid the common pitfalls that typically come up during user acceptance testing. And you're going to learn how to identify the insights after the user acceptance testing is done, the good, bad, and the ugly, so that you can improve the way you are managing your own user acceptance testing phase of your Salesforce projects in the future. And as you can see right here, this is the curriculum for this course. In addition, you're going to get the bonus UAT templates library, as well as the UAT checklists library, to make sure that you are set up for success and you have the reference resources needed to make sure that you are managing your Salesforce projects like a pro. I'll put a link to this course down below. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you've got any questions or comments, just drop me a note down below and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.